Hello, I'm Cassandra Joan Butler. I'm an astrologer, I'm a healer, and I want to bring you some information about what's going on in our world right now. I am recording this on the day of the lunar eclipse in the sign of Sagittarius. And as I look around my world, your world, our world, it seems as though everything is awry and an upheaval, and it feels very discordant and chaotic. So astrology, of course, shines a light on whatever is happening here. So I want to make this simple. I want to make this easy to understand and give you basically some information about the moment at hand and moving forward. And the healer in me will also be giving you some practical advice on how to do some hands-on healing that is very, very appropriate to the time at hand. So what is a lunar eclipse? Lunar eclipses are often in pairs with solar eclipses. We don't often spend a lot of time thinking about eclipses, but generally speaking, they come in pairs a couple times a year, but they do repeat patterns. So the last time we had the eclipses in the sign of Sagittarius and Gemini was just after 9/11 in the year 2001. So we're coming into a timetable similar to post 9/11. Go back to that time frame. We had renewed and strengthened security, surveillance. We had the Patriot Act, and we had to fight back with the unseen enemy, so to speak, at that time. So the same type of cycle is unfolding before our very eyes as we move forward in the next year or so. The lunar eclipse of this day is heralding eclipses in the signs of Gemini and Sagittarius for approximately a year. So what are these two signs and what do they have in common? All the 12 signs of the zodiac can be explained in terms of polarity, pairs. So we have 6 pairs, not just 12 signs. Gemini is what gathers the facts and the figures and the data. Sagittarius is the judge and the evaluator of information. So we are coming into a cycle when the words we use and the way we calibrate information and gather information is extremely important. Gemini is like the news media coming at us from all directions, but Sagittarius makes the evaluations and makes sense and makes wise, authoritative presumptions. Really, it's like this back and forth. Both these signs are related with communications, connections, and so forth. At the lunar eclipse, while we are in the sun sign period of Gemini, the lunar eclipse, the full moon, would be in the opposite sign, would be in Sagittarius. Now, every full moon sometimes has that feeling of being polarized, right? So there's lots of folklore and some actual scientific research on the effects of a full moon. But lunar eclipses take it up a notch or 2 or 3. Lunar eclipses have an element of surprise and unusual sensitivity about it. And this particular lunar eclipse, like any lunar eclipse, is when the moon disappears. And look at that symbolically. One of the lights disappears. It's almost as if the light has disappeared, but it will come back. It will return in a renewed form. So in any case, we may be feeling extraordinary stress right now because after all, just a mere couple of weeks ago, we were just dealing with the pandemic. We were just dealing with economic issues and health concerns and everything that's been going on, of course, with the pandemic. And then George Floyd was killed, and then a whole new crisis emerged in this country and really across the world. And it comes down to what are the facts, what's the evaluation, and going back and forth. Now, this particular full moon also has a trigger attached to it, which is Mars, which is the warrior. I'll show you the full moon in just a moment, a picture of the full moon. But in any case, I want to be very clear that we're all under tremendous stress, and Gemini rules the mind. So what to believe, who to believe, being bombarded with different media outlets. There's now the rise of the citizen journalist and so forth. Who to believe, what to believe. This can cause very strong cognitive stress. There's also something of a glimmer of joy and hope as we move through the early time of June, and that is in the version of what's called the Venus star point. I'm just going to say a couple of words about that because the eclipse happens on the 5th of June. I should say happened, it's already passed. And this Venus star point occurred on June 3rd. What's a star point? It's when Venus conjoins with the sun. Now, Venus represents love, values, and not just love of romance, but love of self. And in the sign of Gemini, it's suggestive of loving yourself and blending your mind with your heart. So it's interesting to me that the star point that occurred on the 3rd was at the 13th degree of Gemini. And star point means that we can really expect a next 583-day cycle of attracting something new in our lives that's desirable to us, where we find 13 degrees of Gemini. The lunar eclipse at 15 degrees of Sagittarius is exactly opposite that. So again, here's the theme of polarization, of going back and forth, the tug of war between what we want, Gemini 13, and what we are seemingly trying to let go of, which is 15 degrees of Sagittarius. In front of you is a listing of the lunations for the new moon in Gemini. And here's what we're looking at. The 15 degrees Sagittarius full moon lunar eclipse on the 5th of June is in the cycle period that began on May 22nd. I use Sabian symbols. Sabian symbols are word pictures for each of the degrees on our 360-degree circle of which astrology is built upon. So it's very interesting. This cycle began on the 22nd of May, and get a load of the word picture. It's the Garden of Versailles in Paris, and that represents, in analysis, the symbol of this particular symbol of a revolution against the established order. Isn't that interesting? Again, when I first saw that, I thought that perhaps people would be taking to the streets in protest against the pandemic pause. I was so wrong, of course, because I did not anticipate the killing of George Floyd. And the full moon lunar eclipse, its Sabian symbol is seagulls fly around in expectation for food. It's almost like a begging type of symbol. But going forward, and that happens on the 13th of June, this is an important symbol. A prophet carrying down tablets of the new law is walking down Mount Sinai. That interpretation means mandate. So things may be out of control during the cycle. We're talking about revolution against established order. And then as we get past the 13th of June, perhaps a mandate, a new law. So here's that push-pull. Here's an astrological chart of the Venus star point. And you can see Venus is conjunct the sun, right next to the sun. Venus is also retrograde, by the way. And anytime a planet is retrograde, we go into a period of time when we review, remember, reconsider. So all of us are a little nostalgic for the things that we used to do and used to love, or perhaps the people that used to be in our lives, old relationships. In any case, this Venus retrograde will be continuing for a bit. So here is the full moon lunar eclipse. Take a load of this energy. Here's the eclipse, the opposition between the sun and the moon, but it's at 15 degrees. But this is the capstone of the eclipse, which is Mars. Mars is anger. Mars is attack. Mars is the soldier. Mars is squaring. You see this nice little triangle in the middle? This is the configuration in the sky on the 5th of June. And typically, when we take a look at what's called a T-square, we consciously want to fill in the blank, the opposite leg of the T-square. It's almost as if we're working on a three-legged table. So when we consciously put our energy on the opposite sign, 15 degrees of Virgo, then we feel more balanced. So a suggestion to you would do the Virgo thing during the next 2 weeks, specifically to help balance the stress. 15 degrees of Virgo. Well, that means taking care of yourself, watching your diet, exercising, organizing, cleaning, doing something of service to others, being of service, being behind the scenes and taking care of little details. Doing that will help quell some of the chaos that you may be feeling reflected by the chaos outside of yourself. All right, so I also wanted to do this video because I've been getting a lot of many of my clients have been asking me about this little meme that's been circulating the internet. I've gotten several people say, Cassandra, is this true? People who do not know astrology, and they're concerned. And on the left here, this is what is being circulated. The last time Saturn was in Aquarius was the Rodney King riots. Okay, that is very true. The last time Pluto was in Capricorn was during the American Revolution. True again. The last time Neptune was in Pisces, Rome fell. Well, that's not quite true. But when Rome fell, Neptune was in Pisces. Please understand, astrology is a study of cycles, and those cycles are dependent upon the orbits of the specific planets. So Saturn has a 28.9 year cycle. So every 29 years, we kind of re-experience what Saturn is expressing to our individual charts and the charts of the collective. Saturn represents rules, Saturn represents limitations, Saturn represents authorities, and Aquarius represents the people. All right. So indeed, it was called actually, what was it called here? The 1992 LA riots, sometimes called the 1992 Los Angeles uprising. I got that from Wikipedia, of course. That occurred in April and May of 1992. All right, so that was happening then, and Saturn indeed is in Aquarius now. Now, Pluto has a 248-year orbit, so approximately the time of the beginnings of the United States of America, we indeed did have Pluto in Capricorn, and that's quite true. Neptune, however, last time in the 19th century was in Pisces, and at the time, actually, the actual year that it was spinning through the sign of Pisces was the rise not just of the coming Civil War, but more interest in spiritualism, in transcendentalism as a philosophy. That was the last time that Neptune was in Pisces. Okay, what's even more unique about 2020 is what has already occurred back in January. We call it the Capricorn Lineup. This occurred on the 12th of January. Astrologers from across the globe were predicting something very big, very life-changing for the entire planet, because this only occurs about every 500 years. What is this? This is a symbol for Saturn, authority in your face, right? Not picking on the military per se, could be your boss, could be your father. In some instances, it could be your spouse, an authority figure in your face. And this represents Saturn. This represents Pluto, which is death and rebirth. These are the two planets next to each other earlier in January, along with the sun, along with Ceres. Ceres is the asteroid of the grain, Ceres. She represents the mother goddess, Demeter. She represents food, sustenance, home. So that is also being upset and upended, of course, represented by the pandemic. All right, so today I am a Buffalonian. I'm a Buffalo, New York native and lover of my city. This particular day, my fair city was thrown into the international spotlight because of a terrible situation in which a protester had fallen to the ground as he was facing and squaring off with police. Subsequently, 57 police officers resigned as a show of solidarity for the suspension of the police, the two officers involved. And investigations are continuing. You know, I saw this incident of this protester, and he is in the hospital recovering from a terrible fall. And it was very graphic. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen this. But what I'm using the astrology for is to just give you a different perspective. Not that it didn't happen. This gentleman fell. He's severely injured. But I saw this particular incident occurring at different camera angles. There is video out there from many different angles, from the citizen journalists who are loosely, I call the folks with their cell phones capturing every moment of every protest. And of course, the mainstream media and independent media outlets. And depending on what angle you looked at the different videos, you might see different things. So I want to start with that, with Buffalo's chart and the planet that represents media and represents vision and represents camera and represents symbolism. It's Neptune. So in Buffalo's chart, the sixth house represents public servants, right? Police officers, frontline medical people. And that big old Capricorn lineup, which represents total upheaval and change that occurred in January, was here in Buffalo's house that represents public servants. It also represents health. Well, in any case, you can see here's Neptune, which can be foggy, and Jupiter and Pluto aligned here. We also have Mars, which is relative to this full moon, angry full moon lunar eclipse here in Buffalo's chart, next to Neptune again, like what really went on, what really was happening, depending upon the camera. By the way, initially the police had said this gentleman had fallen, but then once the video came out, undeniably there was a shoving match. So we're getting different perspectives, but what's the truth? What's really going on? We're depending on our evaluation, not just through facts, but through the lens of Mars and Neptune conjunct Jupiter. Wow. Also in Buffalo's chart, we've got this little rabble rouser, Black Moon Lilith, and she's next to Uranus on top of Buffalo's sun sign. Black Moon Lilith represents the quality of the ultimate rebel, the ultimate fringe feminine energy that takes nothing from no one. And she's operating in Buffalo's chart today, this week. So I wanted to share this chart with you. I also wanted to share the full moon chart with you on the US's chart, and this is very telling. All right, so we have the full moon is on the rising sign of the United States. Keep in mind, the US has a chart which was created by the founding fathers, who were Masons, who knew astrology. You have to be a card-carrying Mason, you have to know astrology. So that's another video unto itself. But this is the chart in the middle. We are a Sagittarius rising nation, which represents freedom, independence, the ability to think and expand and pursue happiness. That's what the Sagittarius piece of the US's chart is about. We're also a humanitarian country which invites the entire world and to its shores. That's its moon in Aquarius. And of course, we're the maternal and sometimes overly meddlesome Cancer sun. Well, with this full moon lunar eclipse, the moon is the difficult part. It's on the first house. You could make an argument that this is a country that's codified to have independence and freedom for all. And when the one, justice for all, one person doesn't enjoy or appreciate that freedom, then the rage comes out. In some ways, George Floyd, God rest his soul, who was a Sagittarius, is aligned with this configuration. He also had an Aquarius moon, which is the moon of the United States. And by all accounts, listening to his friends and family who referred to him as a gentle giant, I trust the astrology. I would say that he was an amazingly gentle, wonderful soul. So we've got that Sagittarius going here. We also have, with this full moon, the sun is on top of Mars. So there's so much anger on the streets. There's so much rage that's being activated. And, but the other thing I really want to emphasize with you all, which sometimes is overlooked by some astrologers. In everyone's chart, we have something called Chiron. Chiron is the wounded healer, and it represents that which is sometimes not even apparent to ourselves, the deepest wound, which we sometimes stuff or we ignore. And because everything in astrology is about cycles, Chiron's orbit is approximately 50 years. So every 50 years, each of us experience a healing of our wound. And guess what? The US is going through that right now, much in the same way as was going on in 1968 and 1969, when we had the streets filled with protests over the war and over civil rights, and the things were ablaze. All right, it was not an easy time. Of course, the 60s, that's coming back now. Where is this wound? In the nation's house of home. You could even make an argument this has to do with the pandemic too. All right, so I want to give you some practical tools for healing specific to this time frame, which will be very relevant between now and the end of June. And I use astrology with TCM, traditional Chinese medicine. I do acupressure, and I have found over many years that certain signs align with certain elements in TCM, and here it goes. Gemini Sagittarius, which we're going through right now with this full moon, seems to align with the wood element, with the wood energy in TCM. The wood element comes alive during the springtime. It rules the emotion of anger. The wood element connects with the eyes. It connects with the flavor of sour, and it comes again alive in the spring, and the organs most affected are liver and gallbladder. All right, so here are some simple techniques. I'm going to show both of these diagrams for you, gallbladder meridian and the liver meridian. Please understand that TCM recognizes that our body has pressure points on it, and these pressure points lie along these pathways or meridians. And when we receive acupuncture or acupressure, we're actually helping to stimulate this life force and bring about balance and healing. So because we're all feeling that Gemini Sagittarius push-pull, it can affect our liver and gallbladder. And we want to help quell our anger so we can think straight. So one of the most relevant points here is just take two of your fingers and lightly press and pulse next to your eyes. It's called the outer canthus. So it's right along here. You want to press and just gently pulse. Okay, so this will help, this will quell. The other points here that you can do easily on yourself, and you can just do this before you go to bed or before you meditate, okay, is to take your hands and place them on the lower rib cage and do the same thing. And for our next slide here, for gallbladder, okay, it's hard to show you on the video, but you might want to take your hands and use your knuckles and rub very vigorously along the hip area, right where I'm circling on the video. It's called gallbladder 30. It's usually tender on all of us. In fact, when we get angry, we can imagine people putting their hands on their hips and almost creating a pose of or I don't know, just anger or defensiveness. So by using the knuckles up and down the hips, that will also kind of calm down exceptional anger. So, and then the last point I would suggest you squeeze is the fourth toe on your foot. So to go through these just simple points, you can help your own personal rage about what's happening out there, and sometimes a feeling of helplessness. Can I do more? Can I do more? And I do think that this full moon is triggering that emotion, not so much, right is right and wrong is wrong. People should not brutalize other people. And this triggers a very deep sense of outrage in human beings, of course. But what's difficult with this full moon eclipse is a feeling of helplessness, like what can be done? What can be done? And so using the cognition of Gemini, our cognitive rationality, and that's the solution. And the other solution is balancing it with Sagittarius, which is about taking the steps to go through the process of evaluation and reaching conclusions. In this country, that's called the courts, right? And instead of just firing off and demanding. Well, I think that's all I want to share with you this evening. If you like the video, please subscribe. Please visit me on my Facebook page, which is Cassandra Joan Butler, astrologer and teacher. I do many videos throughout the course of the month. I do a daily meditation, which you can also see categorized here on my YouTube station. So I appreciate you being here with thanks, and we can help ourselves with our own hands using these simple techniques. I wish you all the best and many, many blessings as we navigate these very difficult, trying times together. Be well.